Every single day we put our trust in countless products. We assume they'll work the way they're supposed to, but what happens when they don't? What if a product fights back and someone gets hurt? Well, today we're diving deep into the world of product liability.
Just imagine this for a second. You plug in your laptop, you go to bed, and in the middle of the night, it explodes. Bursts into flames, it injures you, sets your room on fire. I mean, this isn't just some crazy hypothetical. It's a real scenario, and it perfectly sets the stage for our big question. Who is responsible when our own stuff turns on us?
So in this story, it's not just Braden, the guy who bought the laptop, who gets hurt. His roommate, just an innocent bystander, is injured too. And here's where it gets really interesting. Under product liability law, the roommate can also sue the manufacturer. He didn't buy it, he has no contract, nothing. This one idea shows you just how wide the net of responsibility can be cast.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll cover the basics of what product liability even is. Then we're going to look at two big legal ideas. One that's pretty intuitive, called negligence, and another that might surprise you, called strict liability. We'll see how this all works in a tragic, real-world case, which will let us break down the three main ways a product can be defective. And finally, we'll flip the coin and look at how manufacturers can defend themselves.
Okay, let's jump in. This whole area of the law really boils down to answering one single question. When a product causes harm, who foots the bill?
The official name for it is product liability. And I want you to notice just how broad this definition is. It's not just the company that put the final label on the box. We're talking about everyone in the chain, the designers, the makers, the sellers. And it protects pretty much anyone who could get hurt. The person who bought it, someone they lent it to, or yeah, even a bystander like Braden's roommate. Now this is where things get kind of mind-bending. Usually when we think about someone being at fault, we think they were careless, right? But in product liability, we have this wild concept called strict liability, which is basically liability without having to prove anyone was careless. Think about it like this. If your business is, say, blasting with dynamite, or you decide to keep a tiger as a pet, those things are just inherently abnormally dangerous. The law says that even if you're the most careful dynamite blaster in the world, if something goes wrong, the responsibility is on you. Why? Because you chose to engage in that super high-risk activity. The very same logic gets applied to manufacturers. The idea is that they're in the best position to handle the costs of injury, and they can spread that risk across all consumers with tiny price increases. All right, so let's move on to the more familiar side of things, negligence. This one's a lot more straightforward. It's all about a company simply failing to be reasonably careful.
And when the law talks about a manufacturer's duty of care, it's not just one thing. It is incredibly comprehensive. We're talking about the entire life of the product, from the very first blueprint to the materials they choose, to how it's assembled and tested, all the way to the warning labels they stick on the packaging. A screw-up at any one of these steps can be considered negligence.
But, and this is a big but, it's not enough to just say a company was sloppy. You also have to prove something called proximate cause. And here's the magic word. You have to prove that your injury was a foreseeable result of their mistake. Was it predictable that their mess-up could lead to this kind of harm? This idea of foreseeability is absolutely critical, and it was the central issue in a really tragic case involving a snowmobile.
So let's really see how this works in practice with the case of Schwark versus Arctic Cat. And this isn't just some dry legal example, this is a devastating, real-world story that shows how a tiny design choice can literally mean the difference between life and death.
The court documents put it in these really stark, chilling terms. Two sisters were on a snowmobile. The driver was just trying to do a simple three-point turn. She put it in reverse, then shifted to go forward and hit the gas, but instead of going forward, the machine shot backwards, right through a fence and over a cliff.
So, what on earth happened? Well, the family's argument was that the snowmobile's design itself was fatally flawed. See, it had a backup alarm, but here's the kicker. It didn't beep during the entire time the gear shift was in the reverse position. The company, Arctic Cat, their argument was, hey, that alarm was only for people standing around, not for the driver. The driver shouldn't have been relying on it.
And this is where the expert witness comes in and completely changes the game. An investigator found that there was a 2-inch stretch in the gear shift, a silent reverse zone. In that little zone, the alarm was off, but the machine was still in reverse. He even calculated that in that state, it could rocket backwards almost 30 feet in just over 5 seconds. So the court decided it was totally foreseeable that a driver would hear silence and think, okay, I'm in a forward gear now. That made the tragic outcome a direct foreseeable result of a bad design. Now, that snowmobile case is just a perfect textbook example of what's called a design defect. But the law actually slices up product flaws into 3 distinct categories, and it's really helpful to know what they are.
Okay, so first up, you have a manufacturing defect. Think of this as a one-off fluke. The blueprint was fine, but one single item came off the assembly line wrong, like a glass bottle that was accidentally made with walls that are way too thin. Then you have the more serious design defect, like the snowmobile. Here, the problem isn't a mistake in making it, the danger is baked into the blueprint for every single unit. And finally, you have inadequate warning. This is where the product itself could be perfectly designed and made, but the company fails to warn you about a critical risk.
And to see just how damaging an inadequate warning can be, let's look at the case of a boy named Timothy Stange. When he was just 12, he was prescribed a drug called Risperdal. He later developed a permanent and distressing side effect. The whole lawsuit hinged on the claim that the drug maker knew the risk of this happening was way higher than they were telling people. And wow, this right here shows you the smoking gun. The official label on the drug told doctors the risk of this side effect was under 5%. They even called it rare. But when lawyers got hold of the company's own internal data, it showed the risk was actually frequent. That huge gap between what they said and what they knew is the very definition of an inadequate warning.
And this is the testimony that tied it all together. It proved the causation. Stange's own doctor went on record and said flat out, if he had known the true risk, he never would have given that drug to the boy. The bad warning led directly to the harm. The company was found liable.
But, of course, this isn't a total one-way street. A company isn't automatically on the hook every single time a person gets hurt using their product. They have a number of perfectly valid defenses they can use.
A lot of these defenses really come down to the user's behavior. A company can argue that the person knew the product was risky and used it anyway. Or maybe they misused the product in a way that no one could have ever predicted. Sometimes the user's own carelessness played a part in the accident. And then, of course, there's the common sense defense for commonly known dangers. You don't need to put a warning label on a knife that says, "This is sharp."
And that really brings us to the big final question, doesn't it? In our world of constant, rapid innovation, there's always this tension. Product liability law is how our society tries to manage that tension. It pushes companies to be careful, and it gives people a way to seek justice when they're not. But as our tech gets more and more complex, that central question is always there. How do we balance the push for the next big thing with our fundamental need to be safe? It's a balance we all have a stake in. Thanks for watching.